Hey everybody, wake up. This is Wake Up with Mark Joyner, episode number 95. This is the 30-day morning person challenge, day 14, and today we will talk about why it is so damn hard to think for yourself. All right, now on the surface, this sounds like a really simple problem. It's hard to think for yourself because, well, we're designed to seek comfort, right? And thinking for yourself takes effort, so therefore we walk away from the effort. Definitely factors in, right? There's no denying that, but I think it is a much tougher nut to crack than that. It is much deeper. There are layers to unravel here, and let's talk about it. All right, so first off, I want to talk about a book I've mentioned a couple times. It's a rather controversial book because some people claim that there are those in the political sphere in the United States who follow this book. And there are those who claim that know that that's just conspiracy, that nobody uses it. Well, the book is a very well-selling book, so clearly somebody is reading it and using it. Who they are and to what end, I'll leave that to anybody else to decide, but we know that that book is out there and that there are people who use these tools. And I'm going to describe one of the tools that is described in this book, and you can just decide for yourself whether or not it is being used. Now, the book is called Rules for Radicals by a guy named Saul Alinsky. Now, there are those who believe that there are people who, on the left, whatever that is, in the United States, who are using that as a playbook to subvert the will of their political opponents. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you can read the book, you can learn the tactics, and you can see that humans across the spectrum are using these tools. All right, are they using them for the same ends that the author Saul Alinsky advises you to? He, is a rather left-leaning, again, very facile, almost useless term without much nuance, but. Those are his political desires. He seems to be, a bit, leaning in the socialist side of things. And then subsequently, there are those who believe that there are a lot of socialists who use that playbook. Now, I'm sure there are those on the right who are using some of the same tools. Now, one of the things that Alinsky talks about is this notion that ridicule is mankind's most potent weapon. Think about that. Why is ridicule so potent? Well, I think it's multifaceted, right? Part of it is we are designed to want to be part of a tribe, right? We are tribal by nature. Most of us don't feel complete unless we are part of a tribe of some sort. So, if we're hardwired for that, and if we think back to the fact that we have only recently changed technologically within the last few hundred years, and that up to that point, getting kicked out of a tribe was a rather catastrophic thing. Now, if you're kicked out of a tribe, you can find a tribe rather easily. But if we are wired to believe that getting kicked out of the tribe is a catastrophic event, a catastrophic life-ending event, more or less, because you're left to fend for yourself in a rather harsh and brutal environment, well then we can understand why ridicule is so potent, because we don't want to to appear to be going against the ridicule. It's like, oh, okay, the tribe is ridiculing me for this, therefore to continue to be part of the tribe, I must agree with their opinion. That's part of how it works. I think there's an even deeper layer. And I think that humans tend to thrive more with love in their life. Right now, if you read the works of guys like Bruce Lipton, he believes that that we are making ourselves partly with our perceptions and our thoughts, and I think that there's actually a tremendous amount of evidence to support that to some extent our thoughts and our feelings and our perceptions are molding us and shaping us. And I think that this is observably true on many levels. To what degree is it true? To what extent can we extend this idea? I have no idea. We probably haven't found the upper limits of it. I tend to lean on the side of believing that our thoughts are way more potent than we have yet discovered. We're starting to unravel more and more evidence that shows that. Now, one very, very powerful thought, one very healing thought that we can have, or one healing perception, is the perception of love. There is something that, when we feel loved and when we feel love, that it makes us stronger. It heals us more efficiently than without it. So when we are ridiculed, we are suddenly feeling like, oh, I'm cut off from this person's love because I thought this or I did this. Therefore, I better not do that anymore. Otherwise, I am not going to feel that feeling of love. And I think that this is a very interesting thing to observe, because I think that we are creating a dynamic in the world right now where we are training people to cut others off from our love for each other because we disagree. Observe this happening throughout the political spectrum. Okay, one side is going to accuse the other of being more or less like this. I think the zealots of all stripes and all varieties are guilty of this. Not everybody who leans in one direction or another is like this, but we know extremes, and they exist on both sides. It is not an exclusive phenomenon of one side or the other. I think this is a very, very dangerous thing. Okay, when we start cutting each other off because we disagree, this sets up a dynamic where thinking for ourselves becomes extremely difficult, because we don't want to be cut off from the people that we love, that we care about. But we're setting up a dynamic in the world where we almost have to. We almost have to do it. And I'm sure all of us have seen this play out on social media. You have somebody who says something, who expresses an opinion, and then you get another person who is so offended, so triggered by that they start a shit fight with somebody on the internet about it, and then friendships fall apart. Family relationships fall apart because of this disagreement. Now, rather than get together and talk about it and hash it out and try to say, hey, what kind of common ground do we have here? There are tools, for example, in the school of thought, like theory of constraints, where they use things like the evaporating cloud. Is it evaporating cloud or vanishing cloud? To find out where we have common ground and where we disagree, and how we can meet together. There are societies out there. For example, I believe the Quakers have this thing. I think it's the Quakers. I always mix up the Quakers and the Shakers and the Amish and all these guys, but I believe the Quakers have this thing, where they call it a gathering. And what happens is the whole community gets together, and one person at a time gets up and speaks their piece. And it's a very respectful, quiet thing where there's not bickering and arguing. And if you find yourself ready to communicate with someone out of anger, you would stop yourself. And you would say, okay, I'm going to let that person finish saying what they're going to say. I'm going to collect my thoughts. I'm going to calm myself down. And now I'm going to get up and I'm going to speak. We are not being trained to behave like this. We're not being trained to think like this. We are being trained to respond emotionally to things. Now, why is this happening? Is it a consequence of the economics of the news media trying to get our attention? Is it a consequence of social media designing algorithms to become stronger and more potent dopamine hits in our lives? Or is it both of those things and something else, someone else's agenda? It's very hard to unravel the causality of things. It's hard for us to know why something is happening or who is causing something, but we can observe the phenomena regardless. And that's what I want you to do today, is to observe that this is going on and to ask yourself, is this the way we want to live? Is this the way we want the planet to shape itself and to unfold? Do we want to be at perpetual loggerheads with each other, bickering and fighting about things, threatening to cut each other off from our care and affection, threatening to kick each other out of our various tribes because we disagree? Or do we want to understand that, hey, perhaps getting along and accepting each other is more important than a particular political issue? Now, it gets very thorny when some of these political issues have enormous consequences. There's an enormous difference between socialism and capitalism. When we talk about socialism, I'm talking about the actual use of the word socialism, the real meaning. We are losing the meaning of words now. This is another strange phenomenon that's going on. Socialism is strictly speaking, is the central control of the means of production. That's what socialism is. So if somebody tells you that socialism is just meaning having strong social programs, that's not true. Okay, there are some people who have distinguished saying, hey, that person is not actually a socialist. They're a social democrat, meaning that they tend to believe more in they lean more in the direction of the importance of democracy over republicanism, which is about representational democracy. They're leaning more in the direction of hearing the voice of the people and wanting to have very, very strong social programs. That is a very, very different thing from changing the means of production to being controlled by a loose confederation of independent groups to having a central point of failure. I personally believe that having a central point of failure in government is a very, very dangerous thing. From a systems design, systems engineering perspective, we need to have fault tolerance. Central points of failure are bad systems design. And we also know that historically, when power is centralized, power tends to be abused. If you look at the way socialism and communism has risen up throughout history, it necessitates the centralization of power. It is part and parcel with the philosophy. Well, it's also true that communist and socialist regimes are exclusively responsible for the largest volume of democide in history, so far as we know, if we can believe any of the history that we read at all, right? If any of this stuff is accurate. Democide is governments killing their people. Okay, Mao being the guy who has the crowning achievement of being responsible for the largest number, according to some scholars, 80 million. Okay, Hitler is way down there compared to that. Stalin apparently 40 million, right? Notice that all of these, including Hitler, the Nazis were national socialists. That's what the Nazi party was all about. All of the parties that are, or all of the governments and the dictators who are responsible for the highest volume of democide, all did so through socialism and communism. And I'm not saying that the model that's a problem with the model itself. I'm saying that it's a problem with the centralization of power. I don't care what you call it, what you label it, but the centralization of power is the dangerous thing here. Now, we can have centralization of power that is just as dangerous, just as toxic, and call it something else. It doesn't mean that it's a better system. I think that the centralization is inherently problematic. What does this have to do with thinking for yourself? Well, think about it, right? If we're talking about thinking for yourself and we have centralized power that comes in and has a central point of telling you what is truth and what is falsehood, then thinking for yourself runs contra to all of these ideologies that push for greater and greater centralization. I personally am terrified of any push in that direction because I have read historically what has happened, and I have seen what happens to people when they start running around saying, hey, let's all centralize ourselves around one single thought and go out and persecute people who disagree with us. I think that that's just as ugly as racism. It's just as ugly as sexism. It's just another kind of ism. It's another way to divide us. another way to make us cut each other off from each other's affections and community. Okay? This is why thinking for yourself is so hard. But damn it, it's very, very important that we strengthen ourselves so that we can fight that fight. Because if we can't, then that means that someone else's idea is going to occupy your mind and is going to control your life, is going to control your outcomes. I don't want anyone else to have control over my personal sovereignty, especially of my mind, because I've said this before. If you can control someone's speaking, you can control someone's thinking, and if you can control their thinking, you can control their behavior. And if you control their behavior, you control all outcomes in their entire life. Free speech, free thinking is very, very important, but we have to exercise it. And to a certain extent, we have to fight for it. And I'm not saying get out there and be violent, but what I am saying is that get out there and fight this on the battleground of public discourse. If people are trying to tell you that having one particular viewpoint or another is wrong, push back against that and say, okay, we can disagree about this, but don't start going down the path of telling me that I can't think my own thoughts, that thinking these thoughts makes me a bad person. You don't know what's going on in my head. You don't know what intellectual pathway I took to come to the conclusions I got to. If you make an assumption about that, well, that's on you at this point. You haven't actually dove in and examined what's going on in my own mind. And maybe, from time to time, some of the people that we think have thoughts that are stupid or ridiculous are actually not so stupid and ridiculous after all. Maybe much of the stuff that we ridicule throughout our culture is actually the stuff that we need to be believing. And we will never know that if we don't have control of our own thoughts. So that is a battle worth fighting on a day-to-day basis. And I'm going to go fight that battle and many others today and have a beautiful day while I am doing it. I encourage you to do the same.